The war with Iran has now entered its second week, and there is still no end in sight. American and Israeli aircraft continue to strike targets across Iran, steadily carving out pockets of local air superiority. Meanwhile, Iran's Assembly of Experts has proclaimed Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the slain Ayatollah, as the country's new supreme leader. Iran's political and military leadership, headed by Ali Larijani, still believes victory is possible. Although the intensity of Iran's retaliatory strikes has clearly diminished, Iranian ballistic missiles and drones continue to hit targets across the Persian Gulf every single day. These attacks have already forced several Arab states to curb oil production. Combined with the de facto blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, this has pushed Brent crude prices to around $120 per barrel. Fuel prices are climbing, and American consumers are beginning to feel the impact. At the same time, the White House appears unable to control the information chaos surrounding the war. Almost daily, Donald Trump delivers contradictory messages, one day expressing readiness for negotiations, the next suggesting he wants a say in choosing Iran's next supreme leader, and on another day demanding Iran's unconditional surrender. And despite Trump's early declarations that no American troops would be sent to Iran, talk of boots on the ground is growing louder in Washington. Officials are reportedly considering plans for a limited ground operation, either to seize roughly 450 kilograms of Iran's enriched uranium, or to capture the critical oil terminal on Hark Island, through which nearly 90% of Iran's oil exports pass. And so the sons of the Middle East are pulling President Trump even deeper into the conflict. And his critics are increasingly asking whether the president's campaign slogan should really be called America First, or perhaps America Second, Israel First. In the first week of Operation Epic Fury, the United States and Israel bombed more than 3,000 targets across Iran. Much of the campaign has focused on Iran's military infrastructure, particularly facilities belonging to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Among the key targets were the Kojder missile complex near Tehran, the central hub of Iran's ballistic missile program, as well as IRGC bases in Khorramabad, Tabriz, and Shiraz. Iran's defense industry has also come under sustained attack. Facilities in Parchin and Shahrut, known for producing rocket engines and components for ballistic missile warheads, have been struck repeatedly. Airports and seaports are also being targeted intensively, and as a result, Iran's Air Force and Navy have effectively ceased to function. According to CENTCOM, 33 Iranian naval vessels have been destroyed or damaged, including the drone carrier Shahid Bagheri and 2 Kilo-class submarines in Bandar Abbas. In one striking episode, US forces even sank the Iranian frigate Iris Dena, which was caught by the war while deployed near the coast of Sri Lanka. Government buildings are also being hit on a regular basis. On March 2nd, bombs struck the headquarters of the Assembly of Experts, while the body was still in the process of selecting Iran's new supreme leader. The Iranian parliament and the headquarters of the state broadcaster IRIB have also been targeted, alongside facilities belonging to the country's internal security apparatus, including the IRGC, local Basij units, and police stations. In Tehran alone, at least 15 police stations have been bombed over the past week. Iran's air defense network has effectively collapsed as an integrated system. Within the first 100 hours of the war, American and Israeli forces established local air superiority that gradually evolved into near-complete air dominance. According to figures released by the Israeli Defense Forces, roughly 80% of Iran's air defense capabilities have already been destroyed. Meanwhile, the human toll continues to rise. Iranian Health Minister Ali Jafarian reported on March 9th that 1,255 people have been killed in Iran, including 200 children, while 12,000 others have been wounded. In the Gulf states, 11 people have died and another 200 in Lebanon. The most brutal incident occurred in Minab, where a strike in the opening hours of the war hit a school, killing more than 160 people, mostly children. In their own investigation, journalists from Bellingcat and the New York Times published footage showing an American Tomahawk missile striking an IRGC base in Minab, located close to the school. As the video shows, thick plumes of smoke were already rising over the school at the time of the strike. Since the beginning of the war, the United States has reportedly lost 8 soldiers, while Israel has lost 2 and 14 civilians. The American-Israeli air campaign has significantly reduced Iran's offensive capabilities. According to CENTCOM estimates, the intensity of Iranian ballistic missile attacks has fallen by about 90%, while drone strikes have dropped by roughly 83%. Even so, Iran remains capable of continuing its attacks, particularly using drones, of which it still launches around 150 per day. At present, Iranian armed forces are focusing primarily on striking Arab states across the Persian Gulf. Since the beginning of the war, Iran has launched more ballistic missiles and drones toward its Arab neighbors than toward Israel. Following the pattern established in the first days of the conflict, the largest number of attacks has targeted the United Arab Emirates. This focus on Arab states rather than Israel may seem surprising, but it has both military and political logic. Several key US military installations are located in the Gulf, including the CENTCOM Forward Headquarters in Qatar and the headquarters of the US Navy's 5th Fleet in Bahrain. These bases suffer from significant gaps in missile defense, and their proximity to Iran makes them easier targets than Israel, which lies more than 1,000 kilometers away. During the first week of the war, Iranian strikes destroyed or damaged several important American military installations in the Gulf. Communications and early warning systems appear to have suffered particularly heavy losses. At Camp Arif Jan in Kuwait, Iranian strikes destroyed 6 SATCOM randoms protecting communications antennas. At Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, an FPS-132 early warning radar, estimated to be worth more than $1 billion, was reportedly damaged. A successful strike against this system would represent a major achievement for Iran, as the radar protects not only Qatar, but also serves as a key pillar of the region's ballistic missile early warning network. It remains unclear how severe the damage to the FPS-132 radar is. However, if the system is taken offline, it would significantly degrade US and allied missile defense across the entire region. Iranian forces have also scored a successful strike against missile defense infrastructure in Jordan, where they reportedly damaged the TPY-2 radar of a THAAD battery deployed at Muvafaq Salti Air Base. Speculation is now emerging that the United States, and particularly Washington's Arab allies, may be beginning to face shortages of interceptor missiles for their air and missile defense systems. The White House has officially denied these reports, yet the Trump administration has simultaneously convened an emergency meeting with defense industry CEOs to accelerate production. At the same time, South Korea has sped up deliveries of interceptor missiles for the Chonggung systems operated by the United Arab Emirates. It is also important to note that Iranian attacks are not limited to American bases. Energy infrastructure has become another major target. On March 2nd, Iranian drones struck Ras Tanura, Saudi Arabia's largest oil refinery, capable of processing 550,000 barrels per day, temporarily knocking it offline. In Bahrain, Iranian strikes hit the Babco Sitra refinery, while in Qatar, drones targeted the Ras Laffan gas complex. responsible for roughly 20% of global LNG supplies. Fearing further attacks, Qatar Energy has announced a complete suspension of LNG production. Iran's strikes on the Persian Gulf states serve two main purposes. On the one hand, Tehran hopes to pressure Arab leaders who maintain close ties with Trump, such as Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, to push the US president toward ending the war. On the other hand, Iran aims to trigger a global energy shock by driving up oil and gas prices. A key element of this strategy is not only attacks on Gulf energy infrastructure, but also the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, a strategic choke point through which roughly 20% of global oil and gas exports normally pass. Since the first day of the war, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has attacked at least 17 vessels, attempting to transit the strait. As a result, traffic through Hormuz has largely come to a standstill. Only a handful of ships are attempting the passage, often switching off their AIS transponders in an effort to slip through unnoticed. Iran's actions pose a serious challenge for Gulf producers, which have only limited capacity to export oil and gas without relying on the Persian Gulf. Saudi Arabia operates the East-West pipeline, designed to carry up to 5 million barrels per day. And after the outbreak of the war, Saudi Aramco announced plans to increase its capacity to 7 million. In theory, that could handle most of the kingdom's exports. In practice, however, the Red Sea port of Yanbu simply lacks the infrastructure to process such volumes. A similar constraint exists in the United Arab Emirates. The Habshan-Fujairah pipeline allows Emirati oil to bypass Hormuz entirely, but the port of Fujairah cannot handle the full potential flow of roughly 1.8 million barrels per day. Other producers, including Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain, have no meaningful way to circumvent Hormuz at all. As a result, the Gulf states are now racing against time. Oil production cannot continue indefinitely if exports are blocked. If crude cannot leave by tanker, it must be stored, and storage capacity is finite. In Kuwait, analysts estimate that storage tanks could be filled within about 12 days. Other countries have slightly more room, but by the end of the month, most spare storage capacity across the Gulf is expected to be exhausted. And that assumes an optimistic scenario in which none of these storage facilities becomes the next target of Iranian ballistic missiles or drones. The immediate consequence is falling production. As mentioned earlier, Qatar has already suspended most of its LNG output. Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates have also announced significant cuts in oil production in order to slow the filling of their storage facilities. Other Gulf producers may soon be forced to follow the same path. All of this is already being reflected in oil prices. On Monday, March 9th, Brent crude opened at $120 per barrel, marking an increase of more than 50% since the beginning of the war. Yet later in the day, after Trump tried to calm the market, Brent fell below $100 again. Given the scale of production cuts and the rapidly rising insurance costs for tankers, this is not even the worst-case scenario. For now, the market appears to doubt that the blockade of Strait of Hormuz will hold over the long term. Analysts argued that the prolonged blockade would damage Iran's relations with China, one of its key economic partners. Others expect a repeat of what happened during the Iran-Iraq War. At that time, during Operation Earnest Will, the US Navy escorted Kuwaiti tankers to ensure that they could safely leave the Persian Gulf. In the first days of the war, President Trump announced he was prepared to deploy the US Navy to protect tanker traffic, but so far no concrete decisions have been made. Qatar's energy minister, Saad Al-Kaabi, has warned that if steps are not taken quickly to break the blockade of Hormuz, oil prices could surge to as much as $150 per barrel. The crisis in the Gulf has also wider consequences for other oil producers, including Russia. On the Indian market, Russian Urals crude is currently selling about $5 per barrel above Brent. At the same time, Washington has temporarily lifted sanctions for 30 days on Russian oil shipments to India. And that may not be the end of it. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has indicated that, given the current situation on global oil markets, Moscow could soon receive additional temporary sanctions waivers. And yet, oil market crisis may not even be the worst scenario facing the Gulf region. A far more serious humanitarian crisis could be looming. Desalination plants have now become targets in the war. On Saturday, March 7th, such a facility was damaged on the Iranian island of Kashmir, cutting off water supplies to 30 villages. Tehran blamed the United States for the attack, claiming it had been launched from a territory of Bahrain. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi responded by declaring, "An attack on Iranian infrastructure is a dangerous step with serious consequences. It is the United States, not Iran, that has created this precedent." The following day, in retaliation, Iranian forces struck a desalination plant in Bahrain. If such attacks intensify in the coming weeks, the consequences could be devastating. Most Arab states along the Persian Gulf rely heavily on desalination for their drinking water. Desalinated water accounts for 90% of Kuwait's supply, 88% in Bahrain, 86% in Oman, 70% in Saudi Arabia, and 42% in the United Arab Emirates. Iran's dependence is lower, about 3% nationwide. But in the country's southern provinces, desalination still provides roughly 30% of local drinking water, making it a critical resource there as well. Meanwhile, the war is spilling into new corners of the region. Hezbollah has officially entered the conflict, launching more than 200 rockets toward northern Israel. The Israel Defense Forces responded with massive airstrikes on Lebanon. The southern part of the country has been hit particularly hard. Along with Dahiyeh, the southern districts of Beirut, long considered Hezbollah's stronghold. Israeli forces have also moved several kilometers into Lebanese territory and called on civilians to evacuate north of the Litani River. Israeli media are now speculating that the IDF may be preparing for a larger ground invasion aimed at Hezbollah. Pro-Iranian militias operating in Iraq have also joined the fighting. Groups such as Kataib Hezbollah have launched rockets and drones at US military installations scattered across the country. The government of Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani has condemned these attacks, but it appears to lack both the authority and the political will to stop the militias from continuing their operations. In Yemen, however, events are unfolding somewhat differently. Despite a series of statements in recent days from representatives of the Houthi movement, the group has not yet entered the war on Iran's side. A renewed blockade of the Bab al-Mandab Strait could significantly assist Tehran and drive oil and gas prices even higher. For now, however, the Houthis seem to be limiting themselves to demonstrations of force. Iran, meanwhile, is receiving encouraging signals from both Moscow and Beijing. According to reporting by the Wall Street Journal, Russia has begun providing Iran with intelligence gathered from its military reconnaissance satellites. These data reportedly help Iranian forces plan attacks against American military targets in the Persian Gulf. China, which purchases roughly 90% of Iran's oil exports, is also reportedly considering financial assistance to Tehran, as well as shipments of spare parts and components used in missile production. Unofficial reports suggest that, as in the case of China's support for Russia, Beijing is focusing primarily on the delivery of dual-use goods. Several noteworthy incidents have also occurred closer to the front lines. Since the beginning of the war, the United States has lost 3 F-15E fighter jets, but not to Iranian fire. Instead, they were accidentally shot down by a Kuwaiti Fa-18, whose pilot mistakenly identified the American aircraft as hostile. In another incident, an Iranian drone struck an airport in Nakhichevan, Azerbaijan. and a ballistic missile launched toward the Turkish base at Incirlik was intercepted by a US warship before reaching its target. And so the Islamic Republic is not only striking back. After the first phase of massive attacks, the regime is also searching for a new source of stability. That role is now meant to be filled by a new supreme leader. On Sunday, March 8th, the Assembly of Experts announced that it had chosen Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the slain Ayatollah, as Iran's new supreme leader. The decision is controversial. In practice, it amounts to a dynastic succession, something Ayatollah Khamenei himself had opposed during his lifetime. Mojtaba has never held any formal state office and has never run in an election. What he does have, however, are extensive ties to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which reportedly supported his candidacy from the beginning. His elevation to the position of Rahbar should be seen as a step toward greater radicalization of Iranian politics. His father, though unquestionably an autocrat, occasionally allowed limited openings, both domestically by permitting more moderate factions to enter government, and internationally by allowing negotiations with the United States over Iran's nuclear program. Mojtaba is widely believed to be far less inclined toward compromise. According to profiles written before the war, he is expected to take a harder line both at home and abroad. Under his leadership, the influence of the Revolutionary Guard is almost certain to grow further. Iran may also finally take concrete steps toward building a nuclear weapon, a process that had effectively been restrained for years by Mojtaba's father. It remains unclear how Mojtaba's appointment will affect the course of the war with the United States and Israel. Even before the conflict began, Ali Khamenei had delegated significant authority to Ali Larijani and Mohammad Ghalibaf, who now appear to be jointly directing the war effort. There are also credible reports suggesting that Larijani was unhappy with Mojtaba's candidacy and had attempted to secure the position of supreme leader for someone else, possibly his own brother, Sadiq Larijani. For now, it seems likely that the war will continue to be managed by the Larijani-Ghalibaf duo, while Mojtaba's role will remain more limited, at least until the Islamic Republic stabilizes, and he has time to consolidate his position within the system. When discussing Iran's political system, one point stands out. Despite American and Israeli expectations, after a week of war, there are no visible cracks in the structure of the Islamic Republic. No anti-government protests have erupted across the country. Members of the security apparatus are now defecting. If anything, they appear to be closing ranks. Reports have emerged that the Trump administration is deeply frustrated by this outcome and is now attempting to exploit Iran's ethnic divisions by encouraging a Kurdish uprising in western Iran. According to several sources, the CIA has intensified its contacts with Iranian Kurdish groups that have been waging a long-running insurgency against Tehran. The agency is reportedly supplying various Kurdish organizations with weapons, Starlink terminals, and financial support. Most likely, this effort began weeks, if not months, before the war. It is also worth noting that just days before the conflict began, 5 Kurdish factions signed a cooperation agreement, creating what they called the Coalition of Political Forces of Iranian Kurdistan. According to the coalition's manifesto, its stated goal is the destruction of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Among its members is Mustafa Hajri, leader of the Democratic Party of Iranian Kurdistan. Even at the time, analysts suspected that the United States may have played a role in bringing the coalition together. Shortly after the outbreak of war, President Trump reportedly spoke with Hajri as well as leaders of Iraqi Kurdistan, Masoud Barzani of the Kurdistan Democratic Party and Bafel Talabani of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan. While the details of these conversations remain undisclosed, media leaks suggest a clear picture. Washington is attempting to use Iranian Kurds to spark a rebellion in western Iran. The United States would reportedly like to see the effort supported by the Peshmerga forces of Iraqi Kurdistan, with bases of Iranian Kurdish groups inside Iraqi territory serving as logistical hubs for the insurgency. American and Israeli forces are also said to be offering direct air support for Kurdish operations inside Iran. These moves have triggered alarm in Turkey, which views any Kurdish political project as a potential threat to its own territorial integrity. Ankara has made it clear that it will actively work to sabotage any attempt to ignite a Kurdish uprising. Similar alarm is now spreading in Tehran, where Iranian officials increasingly believe that the threat of a rebellion is becoming real. This perception is reinforced by the pattern of American and Israeli airstrikes in western Iran. In recent days, attacks have targeted border posts, police stations, and Revolutionary Guard bases in the region. Tehran fears that such strikes may be designed to weaken local security structures and make it easier for Kurdish fighters to infiltrate western Iran and trigger an uprising. In response, Iran has intensified strikes on bases of Iranian Kurdish groups located across the border in Iraqi Kurdistan. As a result, Iraqi Kurdish authorities now find themselves caught between multiple pressures, from the United States on one side and from Turkey and Iran on the other. For the moment, they appear to be trying to maintain neutrality and avoid being drawn into the conflict across the border. The Kurdish option is not the only controversial idea reportedly circulating in Washington. Although President Trump initially declared that there would be no boots on the ground, the administration is now said to be seriously considering sending a small contingent of US troops into Iran. This would not involve a full-scale ground invasion, but rather limited operations, likely special forces raids. According to reporting by Axios, one scenario under discussion is a raid on a nuclear facility near Isfahan, where roughly 450 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% is believed to be stored. Another option on the table is the seizure of Hark Island, the terminal through which roughly 90% of Iran's oil exports pass. Amid the flood of media coverage, the Trump administration increasingly appears to be losing the information war. The White House has struggled to impose a clear narrative explaining the conflict with Iran. This is partly the result of contradictory messages coming directly from the president himself, but also a series of poorly thought-out statements from members of the administration. A symbol of this messaging failure became a remark by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who attempted to justify the preventive strike against Iran by saying, quote, "We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties." Unquote. Although Rubio later tried to walk back his words, much of the public felt misled. For critics of the war, the statement quickly became evidence that Israel and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had effectively maneuvered Trump into the conflict. Rubio's remarks quickly echoed across the media landscape. One Bloomberg columnist summed up the controversy with a striking headline: "America second, Israel first." The political consequences are already beginning to appear at home. The war with Iran is slowly hitting the wallets of ordinary Americans. The average price of gasoline has climbed to $3.50 per gallon, the highest level since 2022. At the same time, public opinion polls indicate that more than half of Americans oppose the strikes on Iran. For President Trump, however, this does not appear to be decisive. The president continues to believe that high oil and gasoline prices are temporary, and that victory over Iran is already within reach. In many ways, Trump's original mistake may have been judging Iran through the lens of his recent triumph in Venezuela. Trump entered 2026 riding high after he considered a major geopolitical success: the removal of Nicolas Maduro. That victory appears to have fueled his appetite for further rapid and inexpensive wins, this time in the Middle East. But the Venezuelan case was an exception where everything aligned politically, militarily, and economically in Trump's favor. In Caracas, a pro-American faction emerged that was willing to strike deals with Washington. That faction was represented by Delcy Rodriguez, and the operation that led to Maduro's capture ultimately succeeded. Trump seems to have assumed, ignoring the vastly different local conditions, that a similar scenario could be repeated in Iran. The flaws in that reasoning were visible even after the killing of Ayatollah Khamenei, when Trump suggested that the United States should have a say in who becomes Iran's next supreme leader. But Iran is not Venezuela. After more than a week of war, the United States and Israel have inflicted heavy damage on Iran, yet it remains a vast country of 90 million people, and its regime is deeply embedded in the structures of the state. For that reason, the end of war is nowhere in sight, and after the appointment of Mojtaba as the new supreme leader, the prospects for compromise appear increasingly remote. 8 American soldiers are dead. Oil and gasoline prices in the United States are surging, and the prospect of a Republican defeat in the midterm elections is beginning to look increasingly likely. The question now is whether President Trump's political instincts will allow him to step back, or whether, once again, the United States will find itself drawn into another endless war in the Middle East.